Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week is part 2 of our 5-part series on anxiety, and today we are looking at anxiety and fear of the future. We'll be deep diving into how fear of the future impacts your life, what are the root causes, including your childhood experiences and inner child, and offering you practical strategies to help you overcome your fear of the future. Okay, David, so let's start with the basics. I know you work with a lot of clients suffering from anxiety and particularly related to fears of the future. So what is this fear of the future and how does it manifest?
It's a really important subject, Alex, because it covers the fundamental principles of the Wu Wei Wisdom model, because it definitely includes that part of the mind that I like to call the inner child. So this is the part of, you may call it your subconscious mind or your ego. And what the inner child is saying is, I can't cope. I want to know for certain. I want to be future-proofed. I want to be in control. So these are all the kind of the inner messages that you're getting from that part of your mind.
And I guess those inner fears and statements we're making to ourselves can be in any area of our lives. So whether it's to do with our career, to do with money, to do with health issues, to do with family issues, to do with the state of the world in general.
But I think it's important what you just said there, because it's part of our kind of narrative. Oh, it's the fears. Oh, it's the anxiety. Oh, it's the emotion. And this really is what I really want you to focus on. I try and say it on every video because it's so important. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of them. So when you say it's a fear of the future, what you're saying is, I'm creating a fear about the future. This is so important because if you just base yourself in the emotion of fear, you'll never sort this out. Remember, you create fear. So we have to find the beliefs, the principles, the understanding, the thoughts that are creating the fear about the future, because you'll never solve this problem until you get to those fundamental beliefs.
And of course, David, this is exactly what we talked about on last week's teaching, which I will put a link to in the show notes for you, our part 1, which is the kind of anxiety fundamentals in the Wu Wei Wisdom model. So here today, we are talking about a label, the fear of the future. So that fear manifests in a physiological response, uptightness, headaches, tension, a sense like a pervasive, I guess, sense of low energy, which then in turn affects our life choices, because if we are low energy or we're physically not at our best, we don't have the ability to deal with life challenges. So it tends to be almost like a vicious circle. But the point of it, I think you were making, is that we can get very distracted by the physiological response, the feelings, the red light, painful, uncomfortable feelings that we associated with the fear and future, and make them the problem. Or we make the external circumstances the problem, like, oh, there's uncertainty in my workplace in terms of people being made redundant. Oh, the world is kind of in a crisis mode, the threat of nuclear war. We become very focused on our emotional feelings or the external situation, and we somehow detach from actually the thing we can control and the thing that is probably causing the fear, the physiological response, which is our thoughts, which is our beliefs.
Yeah, so what you just explained is what happens is that we become the victim of the emotion. So we don't accept that we're creating the emotion. And this is why the fear of the future is so important. We believe it's the idea of the future that's creating the emotion. It's almost coming from the outside and you're the victim of it, when all of this is just comes from your belief of the future. And as I said at the beginning, it's wanting to be in control. It's wanting to know what the future is going to bring. Can you deal with it? Can you cope with it? Are you in control with it? Will it overwhelm you? So you have these beliefs which then create the emotion. That's why I prefer to call it a red light emotion rather than fear. And then you can say, I have this fear of the future. I create this emotion about the future, because all that's doing really is confusing you. It's putting you on what we call the carousel of despair. You're going around and around, and you're not focusing on what is it you believe about the future? What is your thoughts? What do you believe is going to happen as in the future? And then the inner child will always create what I call the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
It will give you what, the world is going to end. I'm going to get made redundant. This is going to finish. I'm not going to be able to cope with it. It's going to be too much for me. It will always give you the narrative of the worst case scenario. And it will tell you it does that because it's doing you a favor. It's preparing you. Isn't it better to be prepared for the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
But there's the logic, and then you get stuck on the carousel.
Yeah, and I think we need to be careful to say that what we're teaching here is not about denying reality, denying that there are potential threats or there are things that we need to be wary of. But what we're saying is, don't narrow your focus, don't allow yourself to be led by your ego fears or your inner child's fears, because as you said, the inner child will offer you the worst case scenario outcome in whatever issue you are thinking ahead about, which may be a realistic outcome, but if we can broaden our perspective to see all the possible outcomes, so that's the first step, and also not default to believing the inner child when it tells us we're not going to be able to cope. We must know everything for certain, otherwise the world is a scary and dangerous place. All these extreme beliefs that our inner child has a tendency to hold on to, that coupled with a very narrow view of possible outcomes, is almost like a deadly combination, which locks us down into this paralysis of, I can't move. It's going to be a disaster. And we allow the inner child to convince us of that.
Well, it's the opposite of being in reality, really, because if you follow that inner child's narrative, you're not dealing with reality. You're dealing with the illusion of the inner child is creating. As you said, you're dealing with a very narrow outcome. And just ask yourself at the moment, and this is one of the strangest things, you probably can't remember all the worst case scenarios that you've invented during your life. How many of those have ever actually happened? And I would say virtually none. But you're always looking at the worst case scenario. And then you end up, as Alex has just explained, in paralysis. You just get stuck. You can't move, and you go round and around because the energy still has to move. But what you're doing, you're almost on that carousel going round and around and not being able to move in your flow, in your Wu Wei.
And I think there's two additional things going on here as well, that the inner child has this inbuilt desire for confirmation bias. So, there may be obvious possible good outcomes, let's say, to an unpredictable situation. But because of the inner child's confirmation bias, if the inner child believes the world is a place of scarcity, or things always go wrong for me, or I'm not going to be able to cope with this, that inner child part of our mind will always look for the confirmation bias evidence to support that belief. So it will look for where things are going wrong, where people are acting inappropriately, where there is discrimination, and it will ignore all the other evidence that's presented to show that actually things do go right. People can act appropriately. The world is a place of abundance rather than scarcity. So that's one kind of doubling down on the problem. The other issue is that, as you say, when we actually navigate through these life's challenges that we may have had a fear about, like an unpredictable, unknown, unexpected situation, and we navigate through it and we cope, and it's okay, and it's not as bad as we thought, we never take the time to reflect back and say, you know what? All that energy I wasted worrying, wow, did I overestimate how bad that outcome was going to be? It actually turned out okay. Or it turned out not how I wanted, but in the long run, that was a better outcome. We never do that self-reflection. So it's almost like the inner child gets away with having this tantrum of fear, and we never sit down with our inner child and say, you know, darling, can you see this is what happened, and it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be?
That always amazes me, Alex, of what you just described. I see that on nearly every client, that it's even worse than what you just said, because if the worst case scenario didn't happen, then you know what the inner child will do is just to create another worst case scenario. So it's almost like a self-sabotaging, and the inner child will continue on this path until you can step back and listen to this teaching, and to be able to widen and to see that actually you are a coping machine. You've done nothing but cope. And all we're trying to do is to get you to use all your power so you cope much more in your flow, to reach your potential. You will always cope. There's no question. You have, you always will. And this is a message on how to cope better, to understand that you create those emotions. Those emotions do not control you.
And so, David, would you say, in your experience of working with clients, that the beliefs of I can't cope, I'm not going to be able to manage, things always go wrong, the world is a bad and a scary place, there's scarcity rather than abundance, I need to know, because if I need to know everything, because if I don't, it's always going to go wrong, those sorts of beliefs, are they held by people who've had particularly traumatic childhood experiences? Or, you know, what's the kind of origin of these beliefs?
I think it's a good question, Alex, because I think it goes down to the fundamental of the inner child. It's about self-protection. It's about being in control. It's about knowing what's going to happen and have a plan to deal with it. So this can happen, as you say, from a childhood where there's been a lot of dysfunctionality, maybe abuse, maybe a lack of love, or the other side of the pendulum. And remember, when doing this inner child work, remember the pendulum. It can be one side or it can be another side. And so this is the child that's been brought up in cotton wool. It's been overly protected, that has had things done for them, that's been told that they can't do it. And so this would be a normal client, either one extreme or the other. Very rarely on this, I'll swing from one to the other. So it will nearly always relate to your childhood? So this is the first question to ask yourself. What kind of a childhood? What kind of a teaching? What did I learn? Where did I get the basis of my belief system from?
I mean, I can really see how our childhood experiences influence our beliefs, which then affect how we deal with the prospect of future unknowns. I can see how, as you say, on one side, if we were brought up with a very anxious parent who kind of indicated directly or indirectly through their own actions that the world was a scary place, problems always happened, you need to protect yourself, that would create a set of beliefs which would lead to adulthood fear of the future. Or if we were brought up in a childhood environment where there was a lot of unpredictability, like, our parents flew off the handle, there was always arguments, or, no matter what we did, everything seemed out of control. That feeling of out of controlness and the uncomfortable emotional feelings that would have created for us as a child, that, I guess, we then make that a vow to ourselves or a pact. I never want to be in this out of control and type of environment again because it's horrible. Therefore, we're always looking for danger. We're always looking to avoid out of controlness. And of course, we can't do that in the real world.
And the word there are lots of clients use to me, Alex, is the emotion of escalation. Where is this going to go to? Where will this lead to? So isn't it better than I don't know where it's going to lead to? I don't know how the escalation is going to go. So let me avoid. And this is the number one thing that people will do if they call it the fear of the future, the emotion of the future. What they will try and do is to avoid situations, is to, as you say, to keep themselves stuck, to almost allow things to happen and they have to go along with it rather than being in control and piloting their own life.
And so the manifestation of that then, David, is we play small. We avoid taking any risks. We avoid stepping out of our comfort zone. And this can, again, in all aspects of our life, our relationships, our career, our lifestyle.
But remember the pendulum, that's one way. Or the other way, we can become prickly, difficult, argumentative, not wanting to move. Somebody suggests something, we give them 10 reasons why we can't do it. So it's that pendulum again. And it's the pendulum that we call the emotional pendulum in our model. Gets people so confused because we can be dealing with the same thing and one person's reaction is almost opposite to another person's reaction, but it's the same thing. It's the same problem.
And that's so true, David, because often we think, someone who is fearful is very timid, quiet, introverted. But actually, fear, anxiety, fear of the future can manifest in someone who's very yangy, aggressive, argumentative, angry. But behind that outward kind of pushing away, being difficult, is also that scared inner child.
Yes, exactly. And so that's why it's very important to watch your language. Don't use emotions. This idea of fear of the future, I would say, stop using that language. Say, I have a belief about the future. Isn't that much better? And then you can do the golden thread. What is your belief about the future? Ask yourself that now as you're listening to this. What is your belief about the future? And I guess it will come down to one of the three lies. I can't cope. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I'm unworthy. People will reject me. People will abandon me. Here's one I hear all the time. I'll be on my own. I'll be lonely. I'll be nobody to look after me. So you've got to get to those beliefs. Because in the Wu Wei Wisdom model, that's where the work has to be done. And this is why it's spiritual. This is why to get to the core beliefs that lie deep in the fabric of your existence. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? How many times do I say that? What do you believe? Why do you believe it? I can't deal with the future because I can't cope. Why can't you cope? Now we're on the golden thread. Well, I can't cope because. And then it'd be what you said. Well, I haven't been able to cope. Well, hang on a bit. If you've had this wrong belief, you'll never be able to cope.
Yeah.
And so that's what you've got to work through.
So when we encounter, I mean, the best time to do this, David, I would imagine, or the easiest time to do this, is when we're actually encountering a situation, an external situation, which is triggering those inner beliefs within us, causing us to then create the emotions, because it's a challenging, unpredictable, unknown situation beyond our control. Because what we need to do then is, rather than immediately just default to processing the situation through our thoughts and beliefs and then creating the emotions and getting stuck in that whirlwind of uncomfortable emotions, we need to almost slow down what's going on internally. And as you say, question, what do I believe is going to be the outcome here? Why is it I am creating these painful or uncomfortable emotional, physiological feelings in response to the prospect of what's happening here or what could happen here? To slow it down and start questioning. And I guess we can write this down, or we can meditate on this process. And then, as you say, once we've written down the first level of internal dialogue, we then question that. And then, we may start with, oh, well, I'm creating this red light emotion because I believe my test results are going to be really bad and I'm going to have really bad ill health. Okay, so then you question that. Do we know that for sure? And then you will get down to the belief that I'm not going to be able to cope with this. This is going to be a big disaster. But of course, this is all run on the assumption that the test results are going to be really bad. So we've already closed off all the other possible outcomes.
But you said something at the very interesting right at the beginning. You used the word triggered. You see, and this is where at the very beginning people misunderstand this. Your emotions aren't being triggered. It's your belief system that's being triggered. So nobody can make you feel fear. You create fear. You create anxiety. And once you get that clear in your mind, then you can just do what Alex has suggested. Slow right down. Then ask yourself the golden thread question. Why? Why do I believe my results are going to be bad? Why do I believe that I wouldn't be able to cope? Because what the inner child part of your mind is doing is painting the worst case scenario. Now you ask, when is the best time to do this? I believe this should be done in what I call a meditation. A meditation for me is just doing what we're doing. We're doing a meditation now. We're thinking, we're focusing. And I believe that everyone should do 10, 15 minutes of meditation where you can drop your shoulders. You could do that now. Just drop your shoulders, take a breath. And if what we're talking about applies to you, ask yourself that golden thread question, because that golden thread is just analyzing yourself. Why do I think that? Why do I always think the worst case scenario? What do I believe is the benefit of thinking the worst case scenario? So the answer would be, well, I'll be prepared. Is that true? Do you need to be prepared for a scenario that will never happen? Because if that was the case, you'd never get into a motor car again, because the worst case scenario is you could die. So you've got to be able to understand this, because the truth is we live. And here's the spiritual teaching. Here's the Taoist teaching. We live in the unknown. We don't know the future. You can wrinkle your forehead, you can scratch, you can do anything you want to. You don't know the future. No one knows the future. Now, the inner child, as you're listening to that, will not want to accept that. But that is the reality that we live in. We don't know the future. So what is the best way to deal with that? And the metaphor that I like, and I've had some feedback that you like this idea. Remember the old days in the sailing ships where the captain is sailing across the seas. He cannot know the tides, the wind, the storms, the waves. He has to learn to navigate and to deal with that. And that's what we have to do in life, in our voyage. We have to learn to deal with all of the storms that have come our way and to be a better, more skillful sailor. We have to be more skillful in our life. And that's the spiritual teaching.
And that's Wu Wei, this learning, I guess, first step, acceptance that we live in a world of transformation and change, which is unpredictable and largely out of our control. So there's a spiritual teaching of acceptance. And then it's the spiritual teaching of Wu Wei. It's about how we navigate the challenges. It's not avoiding the challenges. It's knowing the challenges are there. So the skill, the wisdom is in the navigation, is of being responsive rather than restrictive. And we are able to be more responsive when we let go of beliefs which create red light emotions, which burn all our energy up.
Well, using my metaphor, what would you think if that captain was standing on the deck and saying, I can't cope with this. This is oh my God, look at this storm coming. I won't be able to cope with that. This is too much this is going to get worse. This is just the starting. We might as well turn back home. And so this is why in your life, as you quite rightly said, we have to accept that life has ebbs and flows, twists and turns, ups and downs. That's life. We can't change that. And the more we relax into it, the more we use our skill and resilience. So the idea that you can't cope is challenging your own resilience. That's not true. And that's why we call them the three lies. I'm not good enough. I can't cope. I'm unlovable, unworthy. What would you think if a captain was standing on the step saying, well, I'm unworthy to be a captain of this ship. I can't cope. Actually, I'm not good enough. You've been deep problems. And so you have to change those very core beliefs that have come from your childhood that we call the inner child. And what's more, they may not even be your beliefs. It may be something you've inherited of a parent, of a situation, and you need to be able to examine those and make those core beliefs align with who you really are, your true potential. You are amazing. And that's the truth. You are amazing to come this far in your life. Just sit down and think about all the storms and the twists and the turns that you've encountered and you've come through. Have you ever patted yourself on the back, as Alex said earlier, and said, well done, you did a great job there. And this is why we call these videos life lessons, to learn, to grow, to reach your potential, to be who you are. You are an amazing, awesome human being. You are a spiritual being. Please accept that about yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And I love the way, really, the message of this teaching is the solution is found both in self-awareness of understanding that you are creating the emotions and understanding your thoughts, your self-talk and your core beliefs and how they are influencing your emotions and your reactions. So there's a self-awareness process. combined with a spiritual perspective, combined with understanding principles of acceptance, of transformation, of change, of evolution, of trusting the universe even, and trusting yourself. I think that's like a beautiful combination. And you mentioned, this involves a lot more detailed kind of understanding of the inner child and understanding of rooting out your core beliefs. And I will put links in the show note to our inner child video playlist and our golden thread video playlist, which has hours and hours and hours of more helpful teachings on there for you. I really hope you have enjoyed this teaching. Please do let us know. And if you have overcome and dealt with your fear of the future, please let us know how you overcame it. What lessons did you learn? We'd love to hear from you. David works every week with clients all over the world via Zoom video call on exactly these sorts of issues. If you'd like to learn more about David's one-to-one consultations, I will also put a link to those in the show notes. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new long-form teachings every Saturday, as well as 2 midweek short snippets of wisdom. So do subscribe so you get notifications of when we publish. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye-bye.